Good afternoon, everyone. Thankful for you tuning in and being a part of our continued devotionals. We're trying, obviously, to present opportunities for you and your family to study God's Word during this time of separation, and hope that you're taking advantage of that. And certainly wish you all the best. And as I know it's been said multiple times, but we all miss each other, I know, and we'll be so grateful and thankful when this period of separation is over and we can all get back together and assemble again together. I know that you are looking forward to that, as we are as well. Just a reminder, as we've been doing, if you'll send those photos in as soon as possible for our 3rd through 6th graders. Just a quick review of what we studied last night from Esther chapter 1. These questions. Number 1, what other name is King Ahasuerus called? Number 2, how many provinces did Ahasuerus reign over? Number 3, what did Vashti do that made Ahasuerus so angry? And number 4, how long did the party hosted by Ahasuerus last? So, parents, sit down with your 3rd through 6th graders, challenge them to go back and look at Esther chapter 1 and answer those questions. It will be of benefit to them, and certainly if you're tuning in, have them sit down and tune in as well, find it in their Bible and study along as well. We are continuing our study in Esther. We're now into chapter 2. So if you have your Bibles, and I'm hoping that you do, turn to Esther chapter 2. If you remember the setting that we looked at yesterday, Vashti is sort of an example, maybe perhaps an accidental one in some ways, but nonetheless an example, and that is that when forced, when pushed, when demanded and commanded by her chauvinistic, sexist husband to do something that she knew and deep down within her, she knew it was wrong, she stood up for herself, and she stood up for females everywhere. And if you remember, that's what sets off this sort of domino effect, because there were those who were in the company of the king who said, well, now if she does that, then that's going to encourage all the other women to stand up. We can't have that happen. And remember that we talked about this concept of this sort of buzzword of what masculinity, what biblical masculinity looks like, and that's not it. You read Esther chapter 1, that's not biblical godly masculinity. It's certainly not even close. So that is sort of the problem, and Vashti sort of becomes an example, sort of a spokesperson against that type of behavior. And like I said, whether that's on purpose or accidental, or just she's standing up for herself and didn't realize the effect it would have, nonetheless, the providence of God, the sovereignty of God is fully in its full strength, if you will, because that event of Vashti standing up to her husband is going to lead to God stepping in through Esther to correct some very serious wrongs that were taking place, especially directed towards God's people and some of the plots and things. We'll get to that as we study. But here in Esther chapter 2, just want to make sure we set the scene properly, that that's what set all this in motion. Verse 1, this is going to be one of the last times, verse 1, verse 4, and I don't know that there's really any other place that I can remember off the top of my head where Vashti's name is mentioned again. And there's a reason for that. If you obviously you're paying attention to Ahasuerus and his treatment of her, you know that once she was out of sight, she was out of mind. And it's sad, but that is the way that he treated her. And so here we are in chapter 2. The king's young men, verse 2, said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king. Let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the citadel, under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them. Let the young women who please the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai. If you remember, let's pause just for a moment. If you remember, we spoke about this at the end of our sort of transitional lesson from Daniel to Esther, that there were those who chose to remain in what was the former Babylonian Empire. Now it belonged to the Medes and the Persians. There were those who just chose to stay there. That was home to them. Jerusalem, not a knock on Jerusalem, it's just that's where many of them had been born and raised over the course of that 70 years. Mordecai was certainly one of those people. If you look at the breakdown here in verse 5, you realize that Mordecai would be, as Paul called himself. Paul called himself a Jew of Jews. Well, that would sort of fit the bill here for Mordecai. He's the son of Jair. He's the son of he's the grandson of Shammai, the great grandson of Kish, and he belongs to the tribe of Benjamin. So he's definitely a Jew through and through. I mean, all the way through his bloodline. But even he didn't feel like Jerusalem was a place to go back to. He just decided to stay. Verse 6 sort of tells you that. He had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. So by this time, Mordecai's probably an older man by the time this is going on. But he had decided to stay. And when the temple is finished in about 516 BC, we're looking at a time 30 years past that. So if you kind of do some math, you realize that Mordecai was probably a middle-aged man, probably in his 30s or 40s, maybe a little bit older than that, when some of the captives started going home, and he decides to stay. And he's got someone that he's taking care of, and that here is verse 7. It's Hadassah, and that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle. She had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure, was lovely to look at. When her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. When the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken to the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. Now, here's the thing. Here's the thing about what's going on here is, if you've ever maybe had issues or possibly doubts concerning the providence of God, the story of Esther is a perfect example of the power of God, even when you can't see it. We know the end of this story. We've studied Esther before, and I'm sure that you have in your own private Bible study, but you know the end of this story. But if you can just pause that for a moment and actually try to read along as it's happening, that at this moment there's no way that you could claim to know how this is going to work out. Literally, your only understanding, if you're in the shoes of Mordecai, your only understanding is that the king has a very serious rage issue. And because of that, there's concern about what he's going to do with those who are outsiders. And Mordecai was certainly an outsider, as were the other Jews. They were outsiders. They didn't belong. They were the captives of the Babylonian Empire. The Medes and Persians sort of inherited them. And if you're Mordecai, you're really not sure how this is going to go. But you do hear what's going on as far as the king searching for a new queen, and you see that Esther is a beautiful young woman, and the truth is you're a little nervous about what to do, but you just think, hey, look, let's see what happens. Verse 10, Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And you see, Mordecai's trying desperately to give Esther a life that will last. There's some very serious compassion taking place here. Mordecai views her as a daughter, but even beyond that, he views her with such love and such hope that perhaps she could be something that the rest of them could not be. And that's going to come back in a phrase that's been used a lot from Esther chapter 4, when Mordecai tells Esther that she was made. How do you know you weren't made for such a time as this? Now that comes back in that phrase, which is, Mordecai's looking at her with great hope that she can be beyond a captive, beyond someone who is simply an outsider. She could be something greater than that. And so verse 11, you see this compassion sort of spill over into his physical activity every day, as Mordecai would constantly walk in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. And that's going to play a major role in our lesson that will come about on Sunday evening when we look at, or Monday evening when we look at the things that are being put into place, the plot that's going to be put into place. It's going to be very important that Mordecai did make this a habit of constantly coming and checking and making sure things were going as they should. Let's skip down to verse 15. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. When Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal place in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Let's pause just for a moment before we move forward. Let's back up. If you look at verse 15, you see that line there. She asked for nothing except what Haggai the king's eunuch advised. When the women would come in, if they pleased the king, then the king would allow them to take something, some whatever that they thought they wanted or needed. And Esther does exactly what you would hope a woman of character would do. She goes in and says, this isn't about me taking things, but I'll take whatever is advised by the king's eunuch, in this case Haggai. And because of that people notice those kinds of things. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because whether or not you understand the need to set proper examples and be proper influences, people notice. I think about things like things that I used to be very adverse to doing. I used to be one of those people that, if you want to open the door, fine, open the door. I'm not going to stand here and hold it for you. And when I was a young man, I remember being taught differently by a family member who just said, that's not how you act. It doesn't matter if you think they ought to be able to open the door on their own. You just go do that because that's the right thing to do and open it for them. Help them in if they need help. It doesn't matter if you surmise that they can open it. No, you just go open the door. And so now I find myself doing that. And it may not be a big deal. At the time, to me, it doesn't even register. It's just what we do. And I try to teach Tucker to do that. I try to make sure that he's respectful and those kinds of things because I know now, I've seen this with my own eyes over the years, that in those moments where you set a proper example, whether or not you even realize you're doing it, people are paying attention to that. And it matters. It really, really matters. The kind of influence that you're having, it really does matter to God. So I want to challenge us all, because we're in this really weird time where things just don't seem to make a whole lot of sense and we're not sure what's going to happen next. Even right now, maybe perhaps more than ever, it matters the kind of person that you are to other people. I know right now you're probably not talking to a whole lot of strangers. You're not really meeting new people. It's probably the people that you're talking to are probably people that you've always talked to, family members, friends, etc. But I would just encourage you to go out of your way to look for opportunities to try to win favor in the eyes of all that see you, that talk to you, that hear from you. Your example matters. And it should be done for the right reasons. And in this case, that's what she's doing. She's not doing this so that she will gain favor. It's what's happening naturally because of who she is. Now, if we go on here, the king loved Esther, verse 17. You know what's going to happen. She won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set a royal crown on her head. And here's one more time that Vashti is mentioned by name, but it's not even the king saying her name. It's just a statement of fact. King gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted remission of taxes to the provinces, gave gifts with royal generosity. Look at that example. Look at that influence that Esther has already had on him. If you go back, he's always been he's been willing to throw a party for anything. Chapter 1 kind of goes to that. But as chapter 1 drew to a close, there was some significant fear of Ahasuerus simply because of how he had treated his wife. I mean, the woman who was serving as queen, he had just thrown her out, basically. And so people were very concerned about that. And this could have gone a completely different way if the wrong person comes before the king at the wrong time. This could have gone in a really bad way, and instead Esther takes that role, and because of the way she acts and how she speaks, and those types of things, and the people that she's influenced, who she's influenced over time, you see sort of a softening of Ahasuerus. His anger is calmed down by the influence of this good woman. So I would say, from this chapter, what do you see about her as she's beginning this role of queen? You see a genuineness about her. She's not. It's not put on. It's not fake. It's not so that I can be powerful. It's not. She's not pursuing this position so that she can tell people what to do. It's a genuine kindness in her. It's just who she is all the time. I find it interesting that a lot of us, we can play some really good roles. I mean, we can be some really good actors from time to time. And I think it's frightening at times, because I think sometimes we play roles so well that we forget who we're supposed to be. We forget who we really are. And unfortunately, sometimes that comes out, and it's not a good thing, because we haven't trained it. We haven't worked on who we really are. We've worked on this persona that we've tried to keep up among our friends and those whose opinions matter to us for reasons that are known only to you. We try so hard to keep that up that we even lose sight of who we really are. Esther never went through that, and that's really powerful. And the reason why I want to make sure you understand that and bring that up is being genuine, being real, being who you're supposed to be in the eyes of God over everyone else. Truthfully, I don't know that you can trade anything for that. I don't think there's anything that's worth that being who you really are. In psychology, they talk about the id and the ego. And the ego is what you portray or what you project to everyone else. And the id is really what you are at your very core. And I would say this as just as a challenge, I think, more than anything, is probably a lot of you are living in your id right now, because you're not having to put on a whole lot of a performance, because it's your family that you're around 24/7, or it's only the very closest of friends who, as long as they're 6 feet away from you, you can hang out with or whatever. But I would think that a lot of you are probably living in your id right now, and I would challenge you to work on that, to become more genuine, to become more transparent with who you are, and just be real, be who you're supposed to be, and be that all the time. If you take it from Esther, I mean, you look at the example that she's setting. I mean, honestly, the reason why she's chosen, verse 15, she's winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her, not because she did anything outside of her character. It's just who she was. And I would challenge us to all grow in genuineness, and let who we are, let that be a godly character, a godly image for others to be influenced by. I think it's a powerful message that is taught here. And then secondarily, and just sort of a behind the scenes picture is Mordecai, and that is the compassion that we talked about. It's compassion personified. It's if compassion were a human, it would be Mordecai in the story. He's consistently worried about other people, even though he perhaps ought to be worried about himself. He's not. He's worried about everyone else. He's worried about Esther. He's worried about, we're going to find out pretty quickly here come Monday night, he's very worried about those connected to him in the Jewish faith and the Jewish walk. He's very concerned. It's just compassion. It's true compassion. Again, it lends itself to the same message that Esther brings, which is it's who he is, all the way to his core, all the way through. Mordecai is a compassionate person, and what a wonderful testimony that could be about any of us if someone were to be able to say that you or I were, man, that person is compassion personified. It's just a powerful message to promote, especially in our day and age where there's a lot of selfishness, there's a lot of self-centeredness, there's a lot of ego. If we're just going to be blunt about it, there's a lot of ego. a lot of me, and less of you. And it's for me to be where I want to be. If I have to step on you, then I'll step on you, and I really won't feel bad about it. There's a lot of conscience issues, even, I would say. And so I think it's a challenge, especially right now, to seek out compassion and to be that for other people. So I think here in chapter 2, one of the things that you see, and we're not quite done with chapter 2, but one of the things you see in chapter 2 is you see the reason why Esther's chosen queen is truly her genuineness. It's who she is at her core. That's what impresses every person she comes in contact with. Ultimately, that's what impresses the king. Truthfully, if you notice, there's not really anything said about her looks during this time. We're told earlier that she's beautiful, that she is a gorgeous young lady, but by the time she meets the king, it's really the conversation is about who she is from a character standpoint. And so I would encourage us to keep that in mind. And certainly, again, Mordecai, that compassion, it just can't be oversold here. It needs to be brought up, and it needs to be something that we all strive to be. So encourage you, go read Esther chapters 1 and 2, and just notice how Esther influences the people around her, and certainly Ahasuerus, the king. We're going to pick up with this on Monday night. We're going to actually on Sunday, just as a reminder, Sunday we'll have Bible class and our worship Sunday morning. And then Sunday night we'll have a period of study that will probably tie to some of the things that we'll discuss during our sermon hour on Sunday morning. So the next time we pick up with Esther will be Monday night. I hope that you will tune in Sunday morning. I hope that you have a blessed weekend. And can I just say at the end of this one, I just want to make this point before you go into your weekend. Remember what this particular Friday represents. It's not exactly this date necessarily, but this Friday has been sort of set aside. It's amazing to think that our world, where so many are battling against the existence of God and against the story of Jesus Christ, it's amazing that our world even acknowledges and calls this Good Friday. On this day was the darkest moment in the history of the world, and yet it's called Good Friday because we know how the story goes. On this Good Friday, on this day, I want you to take into consideration that it was on this day, a day like this, that your Lord and Savior carried that cross as far as he could carry it. His body beaten, his body bloodied. They picked one out of the crowd to carry it for him, and they put him on that cross, and he died. And as I've seen so many of you share, it's beautiful, it's wonderful to see, it's so encouraging to see. Friday's here, but Sunday's coming. I want to encourage you over this weekend, take the time to go look at the story of Jesus, those final hours. Share it with your family. Express how it makes you feel. We discussed this out of 1 John, this concept of how if the sacrifice of Jesus, understanding what he did, doesn't move you, then you need to re-examine who you are and what you are. So I would encourage you to do that. Spend some time with your family. Explain to them and express to your kids how meaningful it is to know the sacrifice of Jesus and the resurrection that is coming. And it's beautiful to think about, it's beautiful to talk about, and beautiful to study, and we will study that together. But I hope that you'll be encouraged to do that with your family over this weekend. Again, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. We look forward to spending some more time with you Sunday morning.